telegram arrived at 4 in the morning, and Clara Dalton knew her life was over before she finished reading it. Her hands shook as she decoded the message in the back room of Silver Bend's telegraph office. The oil lamp casting shadows across words that might as well have been a death sentence. Ezra Kane was coming to collect. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of sending every spare dollar east while keeping her shame buried. And now, he was done waiting. The message was clear. Marry his nephew by week's end, or he would tell the whole town that her father's bankruptcy had left debts Clara still carried. Respectable telegraph operators did not owe money to men like Ezra Kane. She pressed her palm flat against the desk to stop the trembling. The nephew's name was Walter Kane, and Clara had met him once 2 years ago when he passed through Silver Bend. He had cold eyes and soft hands, and a way of looking at women that made her skin crawl. Marrying him would be a cage she would never escape, but refusing meant public ruin, losing her position, losing the tiny room above the general store that she called home. Ezra Kane did not make empty threats. He had bought her father's debts from a Boston bank, and the contract Clara had signed in desperation gave him leverage no court would overturn. The door to the telegraph office rattled. Clara's heart jumped. It was too early for customers, too early for anything but trouble. She folded the telegram quickly and shoved it into her skirt pocket, then walked into the front room with her chin up and her expression smooth. But when she unlocked the door, it was not Ezra Kane standing on the boardwalk. It was Sheriff Harlan Thornton, hat in his hands, dust on his boots, and exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. He has been riding all night, Clara thought. She could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, the way his eyes tracked her face with that careful lawman's attention that missed nothing. "Harlan," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. "Is something wrong?" He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, and the small office suddenly felt much smaller. Harlan Thornton was a big man, not tall, but solid, built like someone who had spent years in the saddle and years breaking up saloon fights. He had been Silver Bend's sheriff for 5 years, and everyone in town trusted him. Everyone respected him. But Clara had always sensed the loneliness beneath the badge. The way he stood apart even in a crowded room. The way his tired eyes scanned every face, as if looking for something he never found. "I need to send a wire," Harlan said quietly. "Official business. But I wanted to ask you something first." Clara moved behind the desk, grateful for the barrier between them. She did not trust herself this morning, not with the telegram burning a hole in her pocket and panic scraping at the inside of her ribs. "Ask." Harlan set his hat on the edge of the desk. "There is talk in town. About you and Walter Kane." Clara's stomach dropped. Already. The telegram had arrived less than an hour ago, and already the gossip had started. Small towns were like that. Secrets spread faster than prairie fire. "What kind of talk?" she asked carefully. Harlan's jaw tightened. "That you are engaged to him. That he is coming to Silver Bend to marry you by week's end." Clara's breath caught. Someone had seen the telegram. Maybe the night operator in the next town over. Maybe someone who worked for Ezra Kane. It did not matter. The story was out, and now she had no room to maneuver. "It is complicated," Clara said. Harlan stepped closer. His voice dropped, and there was something fierce in it that made her look up sharply. "Is he forcing you?" Clara met his eyes. The question hung between them, dangerous and real. She could lie. She should lie. But something in the way Harlan was looking at her, something in the set of his shoulders, made her want to tell the truth for the first time in 3 years. Yes, Clara said. The word came out like a confession. My father died owing money to Ezra Kane. I signed a contract 3 years ago to pay it back. I have been paying every month, but Kane wants more than money now. He wants control. He wants me married to his nephew, so he has a permanent hold in Silver Bend. If I refuse, he will destroy my reputation and take me to court for the debt. I will lose everything. Harlan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "How much do you owe?" Clara shook her head. "It does not matter. I do not have it. And even if I did, Kane would not let me walk away clean. He wants the connection, the leverage." This was never just about money. Harlan's hands curled into fists on the desk. "Then marry me instead." Clara stared at him. "What?" "Marry me," Harlan repeated. His voice was rough, but steady. "If you are married to me, Kane cannot touch you. I am the sheriff. I have land, a clean name, and enough saved to pay off your debt if it comes to that. We make it public, make it legal, and Kane loses his hold." Clara's mind was spinning. This was insane. Harlan barely knew her. They had exchanged pleasantries 100 times, had shared a few conversations when he came in to send official wires. But they were not friends. They were not anything. And yet, he was standing here offering to tie his life to hers. Because some part of him, some fierce protective part, could not stand to see her forced into a trap. "Why would you do this?" Clara asked. Her voice cracked. "You do not owe me anything." Harlan met her eyes, and for a moment she saw past the exhaustion, past the badge, to the man underneath. "Maybe I am tired of standing alone," he said quietly. "Maybe I am tired of watching good people get crushed because no one steps in. Or maybe I just cannot stomach the thought of Walter Kane putting his hands on you." The honesty in his voice hit Clara like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the desk, her heart pounding. This was reckless. This was dangerous. But it was also a way out. And she had been trapped for so long that the sudden possibility of freedom made her dizzy. "If we do this," Clara said slowly, "it has to look real. Kane will not back off unless he believes it. He will look for cracks, for proof that it is a sham. We would have to live together, act like a real married couple, at least in public." Harlan nodded. "I know. And if he finds out the truth," Clara continued, "he will come after both of us. He will use every bit of power he has to ruin you. You could lose your position, your reputation, everything." Harlan's expression did not change. "I know that too." Clara searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that he did not understand what he was offering. But Harlan Thornton had made a career out of walking into danger with his eyes open. He was not a man who flinched. "All right," Clara said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "All right. I will marry you." Harlan exhaled, and some of the tension left his shoulders. "We do it today, before Kane arrives, before he has time to move against you. I will get the preacher, file the papers, make it official by noon." Clara nodded, her mind already racing ahead. The whole town would talk. Everyone would wonder why the quiet telegraph operator and the lonesome sheriff had suddenly decided to marry. But talk was better than ruin. Talk, she could survive. Harlan picked up his hat. I will come back at 10. Be ready. He turned to leave, but Clara found herself speaking before she could stop. Harlan. He paused, his hand on the door. Thank you. He looked back at her, and something in his tired eyes softened. Do not thank me yet. We still have to pull this off. Then he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him. And Clara was alone in the telegraph office with a decision that would change her life, and a question she could not answer. Could a marriage built on desperation ever become something real? By 9 in the morning, the news was all over Silver Bend. Clara heard it from Mrs. Henderson, who came into the telegraph office with her eyes wide and her mouth already moving. Is it true? Are you marrying Sheriff Thornton? Clara forced a smile. Yes. This morning, Mrs. Henderson clutched her shawl. But I thought. Well, everyone thought you were engaged to Walter Kane. That was a misunderstanding, Clara said smoothly. Harlan and I have been courting quietly for months. We simply decided not to wait any longer. The lie came easily, and Clara hated how good she was getting at this. Mrs. Henderson looked skeptical but hungry for details, and Clara gave her just enough to satisfy without giving away anything real. By the time the older woman left, Clara knew the story would be in every shop and every parlor before noon. The ceremony was brief. The preacher was an old man named Reverend Walsh, who had seen enough frontier weddings to know or not to ask questions. Harlan stood beside Clara in his cleanest jacket, with his hat in his hands. And Clara wore her best blouse, with her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. There were 2 witnesses, both men Harlan trusted from the town council, and the whole thing took less than 10 minutes. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them man and wife, Harlan leaned in and kissed Clara's cheek, brief and formal, and Clara felt the weight of the bargain settle over her like a brand. They walked out of the church into bright sunlight, and the small crowd that had gathered on the street erupted into uncertain applause. Clara kept her chin up and her hand on Harlan's arm, playing the part of the happy bride, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. This was real now. Legal. Binding. Harlan led her down the street toward the sheriff's office, and Clara felt every pair of eyes on them. The whispers followed like a shadow. She could imagine what people were saying. Why so sudden? Why so secretive? And where was Walter Kane in all this? They reached the office, and Harlan unlocked the door and ushered her inside. The moment the door closed, the performance dropped. Clara let go of his arm and stepped back, suddenly aware of how small the space was, how alone they were. I need to get your things from the boarding house, Harlan said. You will stay at my place tonight. People will expect it. Clara nodded. She had known this was coming, but the reality of it still made her chest tighten. I do not have much. Just a trunk and a few boxes. I will bring the wagon around this afternoon, Harlan said. In the meantime, you should stay here. If Kane arrives and finds you alone, I want you somewhere I can see. Clara looked around the office. It was plain and functional, with a desk, a gun rack, a wood stove, and a cot in the back room for overnight prisoners. It smelled like leather and gun oil, and old coffee. It smelled like Harlan. He is going to be furious, Clara said quietly. Kane, when he finds out I married you instead. Harlan met her eyes, Let him be furious. He has no legal claim on you now. You are my wife. That is a fact no amount of anger can change. The word wife felt strange in Clara's mouth. She had never imagined herself married. Not like this. Not in a rushed ceremony, with a man she barely knew. But here she was, wearing a gold band Harlan had produced from his pocket, standing in a sheriff's office, and trying to figure out how to survive what came next. "There is something you should know," Harlan said. He leaned against the desk, his arms crossed. "I meant what I said this morning. This does not have to be just an arrangement. If you want it to stay that way, if you want separate rooms and a business partnership, I will respect that. But if you ever want more, if you ever want this to be a real marriage, I am willing." Clara's throat tightened. The honesty in his voice was almost too much. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again. "Really?" Harlan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I have spent 5 years in this town doing my job, keeping the peace, earning respect, and going home every night to an empty house. I am good at being alone, but I am tired of it. And when I saw you this morning, when I saw the fear in your eyes, I realized I had a choice. I could let you get swallowed by Cain's trap, or I could step in and maybe, just maybe, build something better for both of us." Clara's chest ached. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this reckless gamble could turn into something real. But she had learned the hard way that hope was dangerous, that trusting people led to ruin. Her father had trusted the wrong business partners, and it had destroyed him. Clara had trusted that paying off the debt would eventually set her free, and instead, it had only tightened Cain's hole. "I do not know how to do this," Clara admitted. "I do not know how to be married. I do not know how to trust someone when everything I have ever trusted has fallen apart." Harlan pushed off the desk and took a step closer. "Then, we figure it out together. One day at a time. No expectations. No pressure. Just two people trying to survive and maybe finding something good along the way." Clara looked up at him, and for the first time since the telegram arrived, she felt something other than fear. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. Hope. The door to the office opened, and both Clara and Harlan turned sharply. A man stepped inside, tall and lean with pale eyes and a black coat that looked too fine for Silver Bend's dusty streets. Clara's stomach dropped. She recognized him immediately. Walter Cain. He looked at Clara, then at Harlan, and his expression shifted from surprise to cold fury. "Well," he said softly, "is not this a cozy scene?" Harlan moved slightly, putting himself between Clara and Walter. "What do you want, Cain?" Walter's smile was thin and sharp. "I want to know why my future wife is standing in the sheriff's office looking like she just made the worst mistake of her life." "She is not your future wife," Harlan said evenly. "She is my wife. We were married this morning." Walter's expression did not change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Is that so? How convenient. My uncle sends word that Clara Dalton is to marry me, and within hours she is suddenly married to the town sheriff. That does not strike you as suspicious, Thornton?" "It strikes me as a woman making her own choice," Harlan said. "Clara is free to marry whoever she wants. Your uncle has no claim on her." Walter took a step forward. His voice dropped, smooth and venomous. "My uncle has a contract. Clara signed it. She owes him money, and she agreed to the terms. Marrying you does not erase that debt. The debt will be paid, Harlan said. In full. With interest. Draw up the accounting, and I will settle it by the end of the month. Walter's smile widened. You think this is about money? You think paying off a few $100s will make my uncle walk away? Clara found her voice. What does he want then? Walter turned his cold gaze on her. He wants what he has always wanted. Control. Influence. A foothold in every town between here and Denver. You were supposed to be part of that, Clara. A respectable wife for me. A connection to Silver Bend. A way to make sure the telegraph office stayed friendly to Kane business. But now, you have gone and tied yourself to the one man in this town who cannot be bought. Harlan's hand moved closer to his gun. Get out, Kane. Walter laughed, low and humorless. Oh, I am going. But this is not over. My uncle does not take kindly to being crossed, and neither do I. You two just made a very dangerous enemy. He turned and walked out, his boots echoing on the boardwalk. The door swung shut behind him, and the silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Clara let out a shaky breath. He is going to come after us. Harlan nodded, his jaw tight. I know. But we knew that going in. Kane plays dirty, but he is not the law. As long as we stay smart and stay together, we have a chance. Clara wanted to believe him. But the look in Walter Kane's eyes had been pure malice. And she knew that Ezra Kane had resources that went far beyond the law. This was only the beginning. Harlan turned to her. Pack light. We are leaving for my place within the hour. I want you somewhere I can keep an eye on you until we know what Kane is planning. Clara nodded. She did not argue. The fear that had been simmering all morning was boiling over now, and the only thing keeping her steady was the solid presence of the man standing beside her. Harlan Thornton might be a stranger in many ways, but he was also the only person in Silver Bend who had chosen to stand between her and ruin. That had to count for something. Harlan's house was a small cabin on the edge of town, set back from the main street with a view of the hills beyond. It was plain, but sturdy, built from rough-cut timber with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Clara stepped inside and saw a single large room with a wood stove, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed against one wall, and shelves lined with books and supplies. It was clean and sparse, the home of a man who lived alone and did not see the point in decoration. I will sleep on the floor, Harlan said, setting her trunk down near the door. You take the bed. Clara looked at the narrow bed, then at Harlan. We cannot keep that up for long. People will notice if you are walking around exhausted. Harlan shrugged. I have slept in worse places. Clara set her hands on her hips. We are supposed to be a married couple. If anyone comes by and sees you sleeping on the floor, it will raise questions. We need to make this look real, remember? Harlan met her eyes, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. Then, he nodded slowly. All right. We share the bed. But I stay on my side, you stay on yours, and we keep a blanket between us if that makes you more comfortable. Clara's heart was pounding, but she forced herself to nod. Agreed. That night, they ate a simple meal that Clara cooked from the supplies in Harlan's pantry. It was strange, this domestic routine. Strange to move around a kitchen with a man she had married that morning. Strange to sit across from him at the table and make awkward small talk about the weather and the town council meeting next week. But it was also oddly grounding, cooking together, sharing a meal, cleaning up afterward. It felt normal, in a way that nothing else had felt in years. When it was time to sleep, Clara changed into her nightgown behind a curtain Harlan had rigged in the corner. She climbed into the narrow bed and pressed herself against the wall, leaving as much space as possible. Harlan lay down on the other side, still fully dressed except for his boots, and pulled a blanket over himself. The bed was small enough that Clara could feel the heat of his body, even with the space between them. "Good night," Harlan said quietly. "Good night," Clara whispered. She lay awake for a long time, listening to his breathing, feeling the strange intimacy of sharing a bed with a man who was both her husband and a stranger. But eventually, exhaustion won, and she drifted into uneasy sleep. She woke to shouting. Clara sat up, disoriented, her heart racing. Harlan was already on his feet, pulling on his boots and grabbing his gun belt. The shouting was coming from outside, angry voices, and the sound of breaking glass. "Stay here," Harlan ordered. He moved to the door, then paused, and looked back at her. "Lock this behind me. Do not open it for anyone but me." "Harlan, what is happening?" He did not answer. He stepped outside, and Clara heard the lock click as he secured it from the outside. She scrambled out of bed and ran to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. The street was dark except for the glow of torches, and she could see a group of men gathered near the general store. One of them was holding a torch. Another was smashing windows. Clara's blood went cold. This was not random violence. This was a message. She recognized one of the men. It was Walter Kane. Harlan's voice cut through the chaos, loud and commanding. "That is enough. Drop the torches and step back." The men turned, and Clara saw Walter smile. He said something she could not hear, and the men with him laughed. Harlan drew his gun, and the laughter stopped. "This is your one warning," Harlan said. "Disperse now, or I start making arrests." Walter stepped forward, his face lit by torchlight. "You are going to arrest me, Sheriff? On what charge?" "We are just having a little fun. Destruction of property, disturbing the peace, arson if you do not put out those torches," Harlan said evenly. "I can keep going if you want." Walter's smile faded. "You think wearing a badge makes you untouchable, Thornton? You think marrying Clara Dalton gives you the right to interfere in Kane business?" "I think the law gives me the right to stop you from burning down this town," Harlan said. "Now, move." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, Walter made a small gesture, and the men with him began to back away, tossing their torches into the dirt and grinding them out with their boots. But Walter did not move. He stood there staring at Harlan, and Clara could see the promise of violence in his eyes. "This is not over," Walter said softly. "You made a mistake, Thornton, and you are going to pay for it." Then he turned and walked away, his men following. Harlan stood in the street until they were gone, then holstered his gun and came back to the cabin. Clara unlocked the door and let him in, her hands shaking. "Are you all right?" she asked. Harlan nodded, but his expression was grim. "Kane is escalating. He wants to make me look weak, wants to provoke me into making a mistake. We need to be careful." Clara wrapped her shawl around herself. "What if he does not stop? What if he keeps pushing? until someone gets hurt. Harlan met her eyes. Then I will deal with it. But I will not let him hurt you. The conviction in his voice steadied her. Clara took a breath and nodded. All right. What do we do now? Now we make sure everyone in town knows what Kane is doing, Harlan said. We turn public opinion against him. Kane has power, but he does not have loyalty. If the town sees him for what he is, he loses his leverage. The next morning, Clara went back to the telegraph office. Harlan did not want her to, but Clara insisted. If she hid, it would look like fear, and fear was what Kane wanted. So she walked down the main street with her head high and her wedding ring visible, and she opened the office at 7 like always. The first customer was Mrs. Henderson, who came in with a basket of muffins and a worried expression. I heard about last night. Are you all right, dear? Clara smiled. I am fine. Thank you for asking. Mrs. Henderson set the basket on the desk. Everyone is talking about it. About how Walter Kane tried to intimidate Sheriff Thornton. About how Harlan stood up to him. People are saying Kane is dangerous. He is, Clara said quietly. But Harlan is not afraid of him. Mrs. Henderson leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. Is it true what they are saying? That you married Harlan to escape the Kanes? Clara met her eyes. I married Harlan because I wanted to. Because he is a good man. And because I trust him. Whatever the Kanes are spreading, it is lies. Mrs. Henderson studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Well, you picked a good one. Harlan Thornton is the finest sheriff this town has ever had. If anyone can protect you from Ezra Kane, it is him. Clara felt a flicker of warmth in her chest. Thank you. Over the next few days, the story spread. The townspeople took sides. Most of them sided with Harlan, respected his authority, trusted his judgment. But there were a few, men who did business with Ezra Kane or owed him money, who began whispering that maybe Clara was trouble. Maybe Harlan had overstepped. Maybe the Kanes had a right to be angry. Then, the deed dispute started. A rancher named Tom Larkin came into the sheriff's office with a piece of paper and a panicked expression. He claimed that Ezra Kane had produced a deed showing he owned half of Larkspur Ranch, the land Tom's family had worked for 20 years. The deed was dated and signed, looked official, and Tom had no way to fight it. Kane was offering to drop the claim if Tom publicly supported Walter's version of events. If he testified that Clara had been engaged to Walter first and Harlan had interfered. It is a lie, Tom said, his voice shaking. But if I do not do what he wants, I lose my land. I lose everything. Harlan's jaw was tight. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. Give me time to look into this deed. But Clara could see the trap closing. Kane was using every bit of leverage he had, threatening anyone who stood with Harlan, isolating them piece by piece. That night, Clara and Harlan sat at the table in the cabin, going over the paperwork Tom had brought. The deed looked legitimate, but something about it felt wrong. Clara leaned over Harlan's shoulder, studying the signature, the ink, the phrasing. This is forged, she said suddenly. Harlan looked up. How do you know? Clara pointed to the date. This deed claims to be from 1868. But look at the ink. It is too fresh, too black. Old ink fades, and the paper is wrong. This is new stock, not the kind they used 5 years ago. Harlan stared at her. You can tell all that just from looking? Clara shrugged. I have been reading documents and telegrams for years. You learn to spot inconsistencies. Harlan's expression shifted, something like admiration flickering in his tired eyes. If you are right, and I think you are, then we can prove Kane is fabricating evidence. That is fraud. That is a criminal charge. Clara felt a surge of hope. But how do we prove it in a way that holds up in court? We find the real deed, Harlan said. We go to the county records office, pull the original filing, and compare it to Kane's version. If they do not match, Kane is finished. They rode out the next morning, taking the wagon to the county seat 2 towns over. The trip took most of the day, and Clara spent the hours watching the landscape roll by, feeling the tension coil tighter in her chest. If they could prove the deed was fake, they had a real weapon against Kane. But if they were wrong, or if Kane had somehow covered his tracks, this trip would accomplish nothing. The county clerk was an older man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He listened to Harlan's request, then disappeared into a back room filled with filing cabinets and dust. He returned 20 minutes later with a leather-bound ledger and a thin file. Larkspur Ranch, he said, setting the file on the counter. Original deed filed in 1863. No transfers, no liens, no secondary claims. Harlan opened the file and pulled out the document. He laid it beside Kane's forged deed, and the differences were immediate. The original was faded, the ink brown with age, the paper soft and worn. Kane's version was crisp, new, wrong. This is fraud, Harlan said quietly. He looked at the clerk. I need a certified copy of the original, and a signed statement from you confirming there are no other claims on file. The clerk nodded. I will have it ready in an hour. They waited in the small office, and Clara felt the first real spark of hope she had felt in days. They had proof. They had something concrete that could stop Kane. But when they stepped outside to wait by the wagon, Clara saw a familiar figure across the street. Walter Kane, leaning against a post, watching them with cold eyes. He knows, Clara said. Her voice was tight. He followed us. Harlan's hand moved to his gun. Stay close. They walked back to the clerk's office, and Walter did not follow. But Clara could feel his eyes on her back, could feel the threat like a noose tightening. Kane knew they were onto him, and that made him more dangerous than ever. By the time they returned to Silver Bend, it was late afternoon. Harlan filed the certified deed with the town council and sent a formal complaint to the territorial marshal accusing Ezra Kane of fraud. It was a bold move, a direct challenge, and Clara knew Kane would not take it quietly. That night, they barricaded the cabin. Harlan checked the locks, loaded his rifle, and set it near the door. Clara made coffee and tried to steady her nerves. The waiting was the worst part, the not knowing when Kane would strike back. He came at midnight. Clara woke to the sound of breaking glass and Harlan shouting. She scrambled out of bed and saw flames licking up the side of the cabin. Someone had thrown a torch through the window. Harlan grabbed a bucket of water and threw it on the flames, but more torches came through, more fire, and suddenly the small cabin was filling with smoke. Get out, Harlan yelled. Go, now! Clara grabbed her shawl and ran for the door. Harlan was right behind her, dragging their emergency pack and his rifle. They stumbled out into the yard, coughing and gasping, and saw a group of men on horseback silhouetted against the burning cabin. Walter Kane sat in the center, his face illuminated by the firelight. "You should have stayed out of my way, Thornton," Walter called. "Now you are going to watch everything you have burn." Harlan raised his rifle. "You are under arrest, Kane. For arson, for fraud, for attempted murder. Drop your weapons and dismount." Walter laughed. "You think you can arrest me? You think anyone in this territory is going to believe your word over my uncle's?" Harlan fired a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed across the hills, sharp and final. The men on horseback shifted uneasily. Some of them were hired guns, but others were local men. Men who knew Harlan. Men who were starting to realize they had crossed a line. "Next shot goes through you," Harlan said. "Your choice." Walter's smile faded. He stared at Harlan for a long moment, then pulled his horse around. "This is not over," he said. Then he spurred his horse and rode off, his men following. The cabin burned. By the time the townspeople arrived with buckets and help, it was too late to save the structure. But Harlan and Clara were alive, and that was what mattered. They spent the rest of the night at the boarding house, sharing a small room, sitting side by side on the bed, and watching the dawn light creep through the window. "I am sorry," Clara said quietly. "This is my fault. If I had not asked you to marry me, Kane never would have come after you like this." Harlan turned to her, and his expression was fierce. Do not apologize for surviving. Kane is the one who did this. Kane is the one who will pay." "But you lost your home," Clara said. "Everything you owned." Harlan took her hand. "It was just a building. I still have what matters." Clara looked down at their joined hands, and something shifted inside her chest. This man, this quiet, stubborn, fiercely protective man, had lost everything because he chose to stand with her. And he was not angry. He was not bitter. He was still here, still fighting. "I do not know how to do this," Clara whispered. "I do not know how to let someone care about me. I do not know how to be worth it." Harlan squeezed her hand. "You do not have to know. You just have to trust me. One day at a time." Clara met his eyes, and for the first time, she let herself believe it. She let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this reckless marriage could become something real. The territorial marshal arrived 3 days later. His name was John Greer, and he was a hard man with a reputation for fairness. He listened to Harlan's account, reviewed the forged deed, interviewed witnesses, and spent a full day investigating the arson. Then he issued a warrant for Walter Kane's arrest and sent deputies to bring in Ezra Kane for questioning. But Ezra Kane was not a man who went quietly. He arrived in Silver Bend with a lawyer, a stack of documents, and a counterclaim that turned everything on its head. Kane accused Harlan of unlawfully interfering in a legal contract, of coercing Clara into marriage, of fabricating evidence to frame an innocent man. He demanded that the marriage be annulled and Clara be turned over to his custody to fulfill her debt obligations. The case went to trial. The whole town showed up, packing into the small courthouse, eager to see how the battle would play out. Clara sat beside Harlan at the front, her hands folded in her lap, her heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment that would decide everything. Kane's lawyer was smooth and persuasive. He painted Clara as a desperate woman who had manipulated the sheriff, Harlan as a lovesick fool who had overstepped his authority, and the Kanes as the wronged party. He presented contracts, affidavits, character witnesses who swore that Clara had been engaged to Walter and had broken her promise. But Harlan's lawyer, a sharp woman named Elizabeth Grant, who had ridden in from Denver, tore the case apart. She presented the original deed, the clerk's testimony, the evidence of arson, and witness statements from townspeople who had seen Walter Kane's men smashing windows and throwing torches. She called Clara to the stand and let her tell her story in her own words. Clara stood in the witness box and told the truth. She told the court about her father's death, about the debt, about the contract she had signed in desperation. She told them about the telegram that had arrived in the middle of the night, about Walter Kane's cold eyes and Ezra Kane's threats. She told them about Harlan's offer, about the choice she had made, about the fear and the hope and the fragile trust that had grown between them. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Then Elizabeth Grant asked the final question. "Do you regret marrying Sheriff Thornton?" Clara looked across the room at Harlan. He was watching her with those tired, steady eyes, and she saw the man who had stepped between her and ruin, the man who had lost his home defending her, the man who had never asked for anything in return. "No," Clara said clearly. "I do not regret it. Harlan Thornton is the best man I have ever known. Marrying him was the first real choice I have made in 3 years, and I would make it again." The judge, an older man with silver hair and a weathered face, leaned back in his chair. He looked at Ezra Kane, then at Harlan, then at Clara. Then he delivered his ruling. The marriage stands. The debt is dismissed as fraudulent coercion. The arson charges against Walter Kane will proceed to criminal trial. Ezra Kane is fined for fraud and barred from conducting business in this county. Case closed. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered, others argued, but Clara only heard the pounding of her own heart. It was over. They had won. Harlan stood and crossed to the witness box. He offered Clara his hand, and she took it, stepping down and letting him pull her into a brief, fierce embrace. The whole town was watching. But for once, Clara did not care. She held on to Harlan and let herself feel the relief, the gratitude, the beginning of something she had not dared to name. They walked out of the courthouse together into bright sunlight. The townspeople gathered around them, offering congratulations, shaking Harlan's hand, hugging Clara. It felt surreal, this sudden shift from isolation to acceptance. But it also felt earned. That night, they stayed in the boarding house again. The cabin was gone, but Harlan had already started making plans to rebuild. They sat together by the window, watching the stars come out over Silver Bend, and Clara leaned her head against Harlan's shoulder. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we build," Harlan said. "A new house, a new life. Together." Clara smiled. Together. Over the following weeks, the town came together to help rebuild. Men donated lumber, women brought food, and slowly, a new cabin took shape on the site of the old one. Clara worked alongside Harlan, hammering nails, hauling water, painting walls. It was hard work, physical and exhausting, but it was also healing. Every board they laid, every window they hung, was a piece of the future they were building together. One evening, as the sun set and the new cabin stood nearly complete, Harlan found Clara sitting on the front porch steps. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I need to tell you something," Harlan said. Clara turned to him, curious, What is it? When I offered to marry you, it was not just about protecting you from Cain, Harlan said. His voice was quiet, careful. I told myself it was, that I was doing the right thing, being the sheriff. But the truth is, I noticed you a long time ago. The way you carry yourself, the way you never let the hard days break you. I noticed, and I cared, and I did not know how to say it. So when you needed help, I jumped at the chance, because it meant I could be close to you. I am sorry if that makes this complicated. Clara's throat tightened. She reached out and took his hand. It does not make it complicated. It makes it real. I noticed you too, Harlan. I noticed how you never looked away from hard things, how you carried the weight of this town without complaint. I noticed, and I was too afraid to hope that someone like you could want someone like me. Harlan turned to her, his gray eyes searching hers. Clara Dalton, I want you. I want this. I want every difficult, messy, beautiful part of building a life together. If you will have me. Clara leaned in and kissed him. It was the first real kiss they had shared, not the formal peck at their wedding, but something deeper, something full of promise and trust. When they pulled apart, Clara whispered, I will have you, all of you, for as long as you will stay. Harlan smiled, and it transformed his tired face into something warmer, younger, lighter. I am not going anywhere. The new cabin was finished by the end of the month. It was larger than the old one, with a separate bedroom, a proper kitchen, and a wide porch that faced the hills. Clara hung curtains in the windows and planted herbs in a small garden by the door. Harlan built furniture, a table, chairs, a bed frame, everything they needed to make the place a home. And slowly, day by day, the arrangement became a marriage. They fell into rhythms, morning coffee together, evenings on the porch, quiet conversations that stretched late into the night. They learned each other's habits, each other's fears, each other's hopes. Clara told Harlan about her father, about the shame of the bankruptcy, about the years of carrying guilt alone. Harlan told Clara about the loneliness of the badge, about the weight of always being the one people turned to, about the fear that he would never be more than his job. They fought sometimes, small disagreements about money or plans, or how to handle trouble, but they learned to talk through it, to listen, to bend. And every time they came through a hard moment together, the bond between them grew stronger. One morning, 6 months after the trial, Clara woke to find Harlan already up, standing by the window with his coffee. She joined him, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders, and saw what he was looking at. A letter on the table, official looking, with a territorial seal. What is it? Clara asked. Harlan handed her the letter. The territorial marshal is offering me a position, chief deputy, based out of Denver. Better pay, more authority, a chance to make a real difference across the territory. Clara read the letter, then looked up at him. Do you want to take it? Harlan met her eyes. Not if it means leaving you. Not if it means giving up what we have built here. Clara set the letter down. Then do not take it. Stay here. Stay with me. We will build our life in Silver Bend together. Harlan's expression softened. You are sure? Clara smiled. I am sure. I did not survive Ezra Cain in a courtroom and a burning cabin just to lose you to Denver. Harlan laughed. A rare sound, warm and unguarded. He pulled Clara into his arms and held her close. "All right, we stay." That summer, Clara found out she was expecting. The news came as a shock, then as a joy so fierce it took her breath away. She told Harlan one evening on the porch, and he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing like a boy. "We are going to be parents," Harlan said, his voice full of wonder. Clara grinned. "We are." They prepared together, building a cradle, sewing blankets, turning a corner of the cabin into a nursery. The townspeople rallied around them again, bringing gifts, offering advice, celebrating the new life that was coming. Clara felt the weight of shame and secrecy finally lift. She was no longer the woman with the hidden debt. She was Clara Thornton, wife of the sheriff, part of the community, part of something bigger than her own fear. The baby came in early spring, a girl with black hair and gray eyes. They named her Rose, after Harlan's mother. Clara held her daughter in her arms and felt the final piece of her broken heart click into place. This was what she had been fighting for. This was what Harlan had risked everything to give her. A family, a home, a future. Life settled into a new rhythm. Clara returned to the telegraph office part-time, with a neighbor watching Rose during her shifts. Harlan continued his work as sheriff, but he made sure to come home every evening, to sit with Clara and hold his daughter, and be present. They built a life that was ordinary and extraordinary, all at once, filled with small joys and hard work, and the deep satisfaction of choosing each other every single day. Years passed. Rose grew into a bright, curious girl who loved to follow her father around town and ask 100 questions. Clara and Harlan added a son, then another daughter. The cabin expanded, rooms added, a barn built, a life that sprawled and grew. Silver Bend grew too. More families, more businesses, more stability. And through it all, Harlan and Clara remained the steady center, the couple who had fought for each other and won. On their 10th anniversary, Harlan took Clara out to the hills beyond town. They rode together on his horse, her arms around his waist, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders. They stopped at a spot overlooking the valley, a place where they could see Silver Bend spread out below them, small and sturdy and full of life. "Do you ever regret it?" Harlan asked. "Marrying me that morning?" Clara leaned her head against his back. Not for a single second. Harlan turned in the saddle and pulled her close. "I love you, Clara Thornton. I loved you when I barely knew you. And I love you more now than I thought was possible." Clara kissed him, long and slow, and full of 10 years of trust and partnership, and deep, unshakable love. "I love you too. You saved me, Harlan. And then you let me save you back. That is what makes this real." They rode back to town as the sun set side by side, their horses moving in easy rhythm. When they reached the cabin, their children came running out to meet them, laughing and shouting. Clara slid off the horse and gathered them close, and Harlan stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, watching his family with quiet pride. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara and Harlan sat on the porch together. The stars were bright overhead, the air cool and clear. Clara leaned against Harlan, and he wrapped his arm around her, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night. "Do you remember that first morning?" Clara asked. "When you came into the telegraph office and asked me to marry you?" Harlan chuckled. I remember thinking you were going to throw me out. Clara smiled. I almost did. But then I saw the look in your eyes, and I knew you meant it. I knew you were serious. I was terrified, Harlan admitted. I had no idea if it would work. I just knew I could not stand by and watch you get hurt. You were reckless, Clara said. And I am so grateful you were. Harlan kissed the top of her head. Best reckless decision I ever made. They sat together under the stars, and Clara thought about the long road that had brought them here. The fear, the shame, the desperate bargain, the fire, the trial, the slow, steady building of trust. It had not been easy. It had not been simple. But it had been worth it. Every hard moment, every uncertain step had led them to this. A home, a family, a love that had been tested and had held. Clara Thornton closed her eyes and listened to the steady beat of her husband's heart. She thought about the telegram that had arrived 10 years ago, about the impossible choice, about the sheriff who had stepped in when no one else would. She thought about the marriage bargain that had become real love, about the secret debt that had turned into shared strength, and she smiled. Because this was her life now. Not perfect, not easy, but hers. Built with her own hands and Harlan's, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. A life worth fighting for. A love worth everything. The night stretched on, quiet and full of stars, and Clara and Harlan sat together on the porch of the home they had built. Together. Always together. The telegraph office opened at 7, and Clara Thornton was never late. She walked down the main street of Silver Bend with her basket on her arm and her husband's kiss still warm on her lips. And she greeted the morning with the quiet confidence of a woman who had survived, who had fought, who had won. The past was behind her. The future stretched ahead, full of ordinary days and extraordinary love. And that was more than enough. That was everything.